Good evening, everyone. It's such a great privilege to be a part of the LBJ 50th Anniversary Forums and to have this opportunity to have a conversation with a woman whose leadership defines and adds dimension to the title of these forums, Genius for Good. Please welcome Melinda Gates. Hi, Melinda.
Hi, Pat. Thanks for having me.
I was just wondering, how does it feel to be introduced as a genius for good?
Well, I never heard that term before. I had to scratch my head and go, okay, I guess. I don't know.
I think you say okay and thank you because you, in fact, do add dimension to that just on the basis of what you've done for so many people in the world, Melinda. And I want to come to that, but I want to start with you because I just reread your inspiring memoir, The Moment of Lift.
Mhm.
And I recall that you described that moment when all the barriers are overcome to realizing our dreams and desires and potential, and we quite literally take off. So, what was that moment of lift for you?
I think in high school, I had a teacher, my math teacher, who told us girls, I went to an all girls Catholic high school, that we could be good in math. And she demonstrated it to us. She supported us. I actually knew I was good in math. But then she brought computers into the school. And unbeknownst to me, she had to advocate for them to the head principal, a nun. But as soon as she brought those computers in the school, she got a group of us girls together, asked us if we wanted to learn to program. We said, sure. And she just taught us that we could learn anything. And in fact, she let us get out in front of her in programming. And it was just such a powerful lesson about the difference that one person makes in a small group of other people's lives.
And you have made that difference by choosing global philanthropy as the platform for change for good, providing that moment of lift for millions of people around the world, and notably women and girls. And yet, in this time of a global pandemic, which has disproportionately and adversely impacted women, and at a time when women are facing real challenges for economic opportunity and equity, and for women of color, of course, the challenges daily of racial injustice. How do you prioritize now in such a time your philanthropic choices?
Well, I think we have to make sure that people realize that these women's issues are the issue, the front and center issue. I think for too long, the world has seen gender issues as the nice to do, the side issue. And no, they're central and they're coming up. This pandemic has exposed during this time the gaps and the inequities we have in society. One of them being racism, and another one being the unpaid work that women do. Our economy is built on the backs of women's unpaid labor. Women do 2.5 times more unpaid work than men. That's often caring for the young, caring for the elderly, during this time, getting groceries and prescriptions to the elderly, trying to school your kids. And it's having a profound effect on women's ability to stay in the workforce. In fact, women are dropping out in droves. And so we have to, during this time, use all of our voices, whether it's from the news media, whether it's civil society, whether it's government, whether it's me as a philanthropist, to say, no, we have to focus on these women's issues if we're going to build back from this pandemic and build back better than we've been.
And yet, when there are so many threats, and there is this long overdue racial reckoning as well, there are those who are suggesting that that if we want to be a force for good, we really need to deprioritize women's leadership. And yet, in this time, you made this $1 billion commitment to gender equality, putting it front and center. How concerned are you about an economic recession now being led by women, as you suggest, as they have to leave the workforce, and the pushbacks on some of the hard earned rights and freedoms? How do you keep gender equality at the forefront?
We all use our voices and we point to the data that suggests when you have a woman or a person of color with a seat at the table, he or she make different decisions. When they participate in those decisions, we are better as a society. We know it from the private sector. They see it now in their products. Their products sell better when it has a different point of view. So you have to put them at seat at the table. And we now have data that actually suggests that. We can also use the pandemic to point out which countries are doing the best with their pandemic. And no surprise, some of them are headed by female leaders or enlightened male leaders. One of them, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, her country yet again is reopening, New Zealand, because of her response to the pandemic. That's why you need a female in leadership powers. They make different decisions on behalf of all of society, and they make different policy recommendations. They move money differently. And it's just time to have society righted in terms of all of these issues, because then we'll take care of everybody, not just a segment of our population.
It's so good to hear you say this and to hear others from all the sectors you mentioned where there is really good data about the positive outcome of more inclusive teams. But when you look at what we need to have in this world now for a just, sustainable, and equitable recovery and to build back better, as you say, we have to recognize the importance of women's leadership roles. And you, more than many other voices, Melinda, keep putting that forward. What learnings, again, beyond the data, have you observed around the world and the way women lead that does lead to these positive differences?
Women lead usually in coalitions. They look at everybody else. They lead well in teams. They're willing to listen and take disparate points of view at the table from people who don't look like them or sound like them. I see it from the most grassroots level. Let's say I'm traveling to a small remote place in India. I see this power in the collective of women. When they come together, they support one another. They name what's real for them and their kids. They talk about maybe the domestic violence or abuse in the village. But then there's a power that they have together that they can stand up and demand their rights from the chief elder, the men in the village, the government. I see it at that level, and I see it all the way at the corporate board level. When you sit in a boardroom that has not one woman with a seat at the table, but multiple women with seats at the table, 2 or 3, they start demanding the right thing for shareholders and for investors. And they say, these policies we've got, they're not quite right. We need to look at these other issues. You see it in Congress. You see the way women hold our military to task on abuse inside the military. That is a woman's perspective. And that's why we need women of all races with seats at the table.
As you suggest, there's lots of data and research and real-time evidence, especially happening now around the world, to see the way women are leading in crisis, but how the leadership matters in all times. The LBJ School, as you know, Melinda, has recently launched a women's campaign school, and it's a nonpartisan effort to prepare their female students for becoming power players in the political circles. And in this country, we have more women running for office than ever in our history. And at Pivotal Ventures, you're encouraging women to take this pathway to political leadership. Share with us some of the initiatives that are underway that are leading women forward to power and leadership in politics.
Well, like the LBJ school, I see the difference that it makes when you have women in leadership roles. So whether that's on the city council, that's the mayor, that's in the state capitol, that's at the federal level, it makes a difference. So I'm putting money behind organizations that are helping encourage women at all stages of their career to run for office. We know women can win, but not enough women run. And so going and saying to women, you're ready for this next opportunity, this career opportunity, mentoring them, sponsoring them. I worked with the Ascend Fund, for instance, who funds many different nonprofit organizations that bring women in a nonpartisan way into politics and show them and help them see that they are ready to run for these offices. I also put money behind places that are collecting data about women in politics so we can funnel that back in and show people specifically these are places where we've made different policy decisions because women have a seat at the table. And I think if we do some of those things and what the LBJ school is doing, what others are doing, you will start to see more women running for office, being able to gather resources. It takes money to run for these offices, and winning and being successful in those roles.
And getting past some of the stereotypes that have kept women from achieving the political wins and leadership that we do see the differences they make when once there. I want to switch just for a moment, Melinda, to a bigger global picture that the Gates Foundation gives to the world every year in its Goalkeepers report. It's an assessment of the global threats that we're facing, and goodness knows we certainly have lots of them at the moment: increasing economic inequity, racial inequity, food insecurity, climate emergency. The report was described by the New York Times as grim. And it is grim. What it put forward, though, is the idea that the US is stepping a bit away and back from its role on dealing with the impact and intersectionality of all these issues. And yet you remain sort of an optimistic voice in all that. How do you see how we return this country to being a world leader in competence and generosity?
I think we step back into these global institutions and we say, you know, we're here to help lead. We are a partner. We're not the only one leading. I think we're going to have to go in with some humility and some realization that we got a lot of things wrong during this pandemic. But we also need to come in with resources. We are the wealthiest country in the world. And so one of the global partnerships that's been set up, for instance, to get vaccines and therapeutics and tests out to the rest of the world, the US needs to not only be in that, but needs to provide some funding, just like the European nations and other high and middle income countries are putting funding in, so that we get vaccines and therapeutics for everybody, not just certain countries. And quite frankly, it's the only way we're going to get the global economy up and running. We are interconnected. Our supply chains are dependent on these different countries. So the US needs to come in with some humble pie and some resources, and realize that it's just one actor on this global stage. But I think the American people expect that, quite frankly, of our leadership. I don't think we have necessarily been getting that. What I see in the everyday acts of kindness right now going on in the world keeps me encouraged. I think that's the best of who we are as American citizens and humanity. And I think we can step back into those roles.
You know, Melinda, you anticipated my next question, which is really when I hear someone with your experience, what you witness around the world, how much grief and suffering you see, and the efforts, of course, that are made to relieve it and to lead to recovery. I wonder, as a woman leader, what keeps you optimistic? What gives you hope?
It is these small acts of kindness, and it is the next generation. You know, I have 3 adult children. One is in graduate school, one's in college, one's in high school. But hearing the conversations they are having with their friends and hearing their friends' points of view and really listening to one another, and the learning they've been doing as a generation during this time of, you know, protesting in the United States or in pandemic. I mean, this generation, they're flexible, they're resilient, they're learning, they're listening, they want something different. And that makes me encouraged for humanity. And I know that it's actually possible. And they're the most connected generation we've had yet. I think that has some pitfalls, but I think it has some upsides. And I'm encouraged that they'll use that upside for good.
We have to ensure that they do, right? Because
yes, we do.
We have left them many problems, and they know how challenged the reputation of the U.S. and is at the moment, and they can reclaim many of those values with our help. So I'm with you and saying that's where my hope is too. I know also there are many women and men who are with us tonight for this conversation. They want to be geniuses for good.
They
Everybody
are.
wants to be that change for good, right? What what have you learned? What have you seen in your philanthropy as well as your on the ground experiences around the world? What learnings can you share with us that would help each of us as we set about to provide that moment of lift for ourselves and others?
What I have seen and what I know deeply is that one person can make a profound difference in someone else's life. Whether that's a teacher for a kid in middle school, whether that's a healthcare worker, whether that's putting $50 in a woman's account online so that she can buy new seeds for her farm. We have a profound effect on one another by how we show up in the world and how we act. And when you get a group of collective individuals to come together, it's as Margaret Mead said, never underestimate a group of powerful individuals to change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. We all have individual power, whether that's our time, our money, our energy, our hearts, our minds. When we put those things to their best possible use, we can create change individually and as a collective. And I have seen it. I know it. I've seen it all over the world. And we can create the world that we want. And I'm encouraged when I see that.
I'm encouraged as well. And as you know, you and I both believe that one big lever we have that we can use as women and our male allies is showing up for each other.
Absolutely. And Pat, you have shown up for so many people over so many years. I mean, you were in this work before I was, and you and a generation of female leaders before me cut the path for my generation, and I'm cutting the path for the next generation. That's something we pass on as leaders and that we should do. But you're an inspiration to me too, and to many others.
Thank you for that, Melinda. I would love to try something a little bit new and unusual, if you don't mind, knowing
Okay.
that based on our mutual respect and admiration for each other. How about a lightning round in which I just throw out some words and you give me quick, instant responses? Would you be willing to do that?
Sure.
All right. They happen to all start with T.
Okay.
And the first is one that I feel so strongly about, and I imagine you do too. What's your response to the word trust?
Fundamental. It's fundamental to everything we do. There's a friend of Warren Buffett's who says, we live in a web of undeserved trust.
Oh, that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Transparency.
Necessary. And it is one of the things that moves societies forward when you have transparency about what's really going on or good data. Data is transparency because it shows you what's actually really happening.
Mm. Tenacity.
I want to use the word fundamental again. I honestly, tenacity is just, it's a necessity. You got to be tenacious, particularly if you're working on hard societal issues. Warren always said to Bill and me at the beginning of the foundation, look, on your down days, don't get down on yourself when you don't feel like you're making progress. He said, you're working on the issues that society has left behind because they are hard. And so what I would tell anybody working on any societal issue, it takes tenacity, even on the hard days.
So good. Tenderness.
Heart. When I think of tenderness, I think of a mother's love for their child. And I have not only experienced it, with my own children, but I've seen it with mothers holding their babies all over the globe. And it's that tenderness of that bond, of that relationship that is the most important thing in life. And it's what allows us to flourish and to be who we're meant to be when you have that tenderness.
And lastly, Texas.
Lone Star State. Home for me. I grew up there, surprisingly. So somewhere in the back of my closet, I'm sure I still have a pair of cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, but they're collecting a little dust these days because I can't travel, but Texas is my home.
And Texas is the home of the LBGA school and these forums. And actually, I just am sorry we didn't ask you to go into that closet and get the cowboy boots and the cowboy hat because I would have loved them. As actually my image of you, Melinda, is with those big boots, walking through the world, leaving big footprints, changing the world for good. Thank you for this time, Melinda Gates.
Thank you, Pat. So enjoyed the conversation.